Ecco, in questo immenso minuto di raccoglimento che la comunità umana sta vivendo in tutto il mondo per l'attesa di questo nuovo Papa, forse è questa l'occasione per riflettere sul già e non ancora che è in atto, su che cosa ci attende, perché non sappiamo quando il mondo finirà.
Una provocazione, leggevo
Sì.
sui social, dove leggiamo di tutto, che un collega scriveva: ma in questo momento che c'è una preoccupazione geopolitica per quello che è successo tra India e Pakistan, è possibile che invece tutte le testate internazionali stiano a guardare un comignolo in piazza San Pietro? È quasi una provocazione di un collega. Come rispondi?
Rispondo che il fatto che un paese come quello di Gandhi sia in questo momento impegnato in un potenziale conflitto, annoso conflitto con il Pakistan, ci riporta proprio all'essenza. Il comignolo è l'attesa e la riflessione. Il comignolo non è il comignolo tanto per, no? E c'è anche il profilo social del gabbiano, del comignolo su X. È simbolo di qualcos'altro. Noi stiamo aspettando qualcosa che attende tutta l'umanità, credenti e non credenti. Qui non è un problema di essere
reality. What's going on is of very much interest to the entire.
And you found out that people of all faiths, people of no faith, were fascinated by this man because he took positions that one could understand, positions of morality that you might not have be part of your writings and teachings in the church, but he could reach out to people on a people level. You don't have to know canon law or the catechism of the church to understand what John Paul taught. So I thought his reaching out in that respect. And I've always loved the image of the two colonnades embracing all of the humanity that comes inside. So you'd walk inside, and then you're going to walk towards a door of this beautiful church, this basilica of St. Peter's.
And the colonnade, Michelangelo designed the St. Peter's Square and the facade and everything. He didn't build it in the end, but he designed it. And even as soon ago as 1930s, I believe, 1920s, the squares leading up to the streets that were led up to St. Peter's Basilica, and this was how Michelangelo designed his layout of that area of the city, was just like a maze. There wasn't a straight vision. Yeah. And so the Borgo was there were streets, but there were buildings right in front of St. Peter's Square. So the whole point was that people they'd be walking through, and they'd kind of zigzag through a maze, and all of a sudden you come up and you open up onto St. Peter's Square, and the opening, the magnificence of it, and how large and welcoming it is to, and so that was changed obviously during Mussolini's time.
But there were times when buses and cars parked in there were even
and not too long ago.
No, not too long ago. Certainly in my many years here, and there was a brief period when, as you're looking at the basilica, would be in the front part of the left-hand colonnade, when there was a brief market. People selling their fresh produce. So the square has served many people.
Yes, it has. And going back to the College of Cardinals, so the actual conclave, the reality of what's going on. Let's move now and talk a little bit about the makeup of the College of Cardinals. So the Cardinals there's 133 electors, but the whole college is 252. And 52, thank you, Joan. And the makeup has changed greatly during Pope Francis's papacy.
Yes, in fact, as a lot of people have noted, this is the largest conclave number of cardinals. We've had more cardinals. We've had more cardinals eligible to enter the conclave, but this is the first that's been more than the 120 limit that was set by Paul VI. And one of the pieces of business that the cardinals had to work out when they were preparing for this conclave was how that fit within the law. and they determined that Pope Francis, by creating more cardinals, had tacitly dispensed from the 120 limit, so that all 135 cardinals who are eligible could enter the conclave and vote. In fact, we have 133 cardinal electors in the Sistine Chapel, even as we speak. One thing that struck me as kind of curious, Father, your titular cardinal is Cardinal Collins from Toronto. Now is one of the very few times when we have two archbishops of Toronto in the conclave, the emeritus Cardinal Collins, as well as the new, very young Cardinal Frank Leo. But overall, we have 135 cardinal electors, 133 actually in the conclave, from 71 different countries. More than 3/4 of them, 108, were appointed by Pope Francis. About 22 were created by Benedict XVI. And there are still 5 cardinals who were created by John Paul II. So it created more than almost 20 years ago. And so a wide variety. Certainly since the mid-20th century, there's been a very strong effort on the part of the popes to increase the representation, ensuring that there are cardinals from around the world, from traditionally Catholic countries, from Catholics with very small Catholic populations, from large traditional elector countries like Italy and France to places that have never had a cardinal before. I think there's something like 16. One of the very curious numbers, we can talk a little bit more about that, is the number of Eastern cardinals. I believe there are 4 or 5 Eastern cardinals.
5 of them, exactly.
5 Eastern cardinals. And I know, Don, you could perhaps talk about, there was a length of time, although most cardinals now had come from Europe for a very, very long time, and our Latin cardinals, there was a run of Greek and Syriac cardinals in the early Middle Ages.
There were Greek cardinals that were, as a result of the Church's attempt to reconnect with Constantinople after the schism. But we tend to forget how diverse the early papacy was as well. There's a period in the 6th and 7th century where we have a number of Greek, Syriac, and even North African popes. Popes like Gelasius were Latin North African. But today we have Eastern Rite cardinals too, and this is a result of the reaffiliation of many churches with their own rites under papal leadership. There are 23 sui juris churches besides the Latin Church. And there are 5 cardinal electors today that are in the conclave from representing the Eastern rites. There's patriarch, one patriarch, Louis Sacco of the Chaldean Church in Baghdad, Basileus Clemis, who is Cyril Malankara from India, Bernhan Jesus Surafiel, who is from the Ethiopian Church, Mykola Bishok, who is a Ukrainian, very young Ukrainian, is 44, I believe, one of the younger cardinals, and George Kuvakad from the Syro-Malabar Church.
And if you were watching the entrance into the conclave, one of the things you note in that very impressive and moving ceremony, you see all the cardinals walking in. Almost all of them are in the familiar red cassocks of the Latin Church. But the 5 Eastern cardinals stood out for, they all designed their own cardinalatial robes that reflected the traditions of their churches.
Absolutely. It's interesting to see how they work the red, the scarlet into their outfits, into their traditional outfits of their rite, and their traditional choir. And it's clearly the important, but it's also an oddity because these 5 cardinals are electing the head of the Latin Rite as well. It's an interesting extension to see how universal the Church is. That you have these Eastern cardinals participating in the election of the Patriarch of the West, and that's something that's different to consider.
And they also stand out for their headdress.
Yeah.
Because it's not the typical red zucchetto. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that was also a question when they are named cardinals. They have to ask, what is the tradition of our church and how can we incorporate what's a Latin tradition, the cardinalate, into that that vestment. I think there was an Eastern Rite Cardinal in the 1500s, is that right? During one of the periodic attempts at reunion between the East and West. Bessarion.
Cardinal Bessarion, yes.
Remind me, where is he from?
He was from Constantinople. He was from the clergy of Constantinople, from the party that was supportive of both the Renaissance and a renewed dialogue with the Latins. And he became very important for the transmission of Eastern Greek culture and literature to the West, and was a visible sign of unity at that very difficult time.
And one of the first Eastern cardinals in a long time, and so had a very significant role to play. You mentioned, too, Ukrainian-born Mykola Bishok is aged 45. I believe he is, in fact, the youngest cardinal in the college. The oldest taking part is Spaniard Carlos Osora Sierra, who is aged 79. It's interesting, too, there are a couple of cardinals who have just turned 80 very recently, and had the conclave come a little bit earlier, they would have been allowed to enter. In fact, I remember when Benedict made his resignation, the timing of when the resignation went into effect, there was a consideration for the cardinals who were right on the edge there, and they did get everybody in. And yet, because of the circumstances of the time for that election, the number was still under the 120 limit.
There was one of the Syro-Malabar, one of the Eastern cardinals, just missed it by a week, I believe, and others like Cardinal Sarah, I think, would have expired in 2 weeks. As long as they're under 80 on the date the conclave starts, they're entitled to enter the conclave.
I think it's the day that the Pope dies. In fact, there's actually some question about that. I remember we had this discussion amongst ourselves in the broadcast booth, and UDG is very specific, and that too is to ensure, because after the Pope dies, there is the cardinals decide when the conclave opens, and that has historically been a question because of traditional long travel times, and in previous eras where there was a lot of politicking amongst the cardinalate, that could have been an option to exclude someone. So they did change it so that it was from the moment the Pope died, and then it is very much in God's hands who is going to participate in the election. Speaking of age, a few more facts about the cardinals taking part in the conclave. 6 cardinals were actually born in the 70s. Including Cardinal Baldassare Reina, the vicar of the Diocese of Rome, Canadian Cardinal Frank Leo, whom we mentioned, Lithuanian Cardinal Rolandas Makrikas, the coadjutor archpriest of the Basilica of St. Mary Major. He was involved very closely,
we have smoke.
And we do have smoke. Thank you, Don. Well done. It does look like the black smoke is coming out, signaling the conclusion of the second vote, and I think a little earlier than we were expecting.
Exactly. We weren't expecting this until about 12, at least, to 12:30. I believe we have Kelsey in the square. No, sorry about that. We do not. We're going to try to get her on the line here shortly to get this reactions. But yes, you can see now we see images of the crowd. The black smoke has come out of the chimney above the Sistine Chapel. Everyone's got their phones out, taking videos of it, and we're going to connect now in here shortly. Okay.
And in fact, that's what you see if you're watching on the television screen. I think all of us remember, at least all of us in studio remember, various elections and conclaves. And as soon as smoke starts coming out, the first question on everybody's lips, is it white or is it black? Happily, this time the black smoke has been very clear and is now as well. And when there is that moment, the crowd just goes silent as everybody's looking up and determining for certain what color is the smoke.
And on the modern means of communication yesterday in the square in the evening, whenever the smoke came out, it was dark. It was the sun had already gone down, and you could see the screens, and you can see on the square that it's a close up there. But those as soon as the smoke started coming out, those TVs turned off, and so that everyone would look up to the actual chimney and to focus on what's real and not just what's in front of our in front of our screens. And then it came back on, and you could see that the smoke was black. And now we're going to go live to Kelsey, who's in the square. Kelsey, what are you getting the sense of?
Wow, it's actually pretty exciting right now because you can hear the surprise from people. I know a lot of people are thinking, well, it hasn't come out yet. There's been no smoke. We're not going to see anything for now. And all around me, you could hear cheers, but also gasps and a couple of people saying, oh, my gosh, this is so exciting. It's the first time I've ever seen this. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people that are actually exiting the square now, probably going to get some lunch to get prepared for the next smoke watch. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think the first question, as Chris said, is it black or white? And the second question is, what am I having for lunch? Are my dinner reservations still valid?
Can I get into the restaurant with 20,000 people trying to get their pizzas and their pastas? I wonder if,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you can see on the screen now that we've got the images, the square is not extremely full. There's heavy security to get in. You got to go through metal detectors. But the first part of the Via della Conciliazione is very full. That's a very packed area. And you can see people moving off, right, Kelsey?
Yeah, actually, it's you're right that in front of the Piazza, Via Conciliazione is packed with a lot of people, a lot of reporters, but a lot of people. And actually in the square, right in front of the steps leading up to the Basilica, that's pretty full, but around the obelisk, it's pretty empty. And, of course, as you mentioned, Devin, a lot of people are exiting now, going to get some water and food and recharge.
Yeah, because we're going to be back again this afternoon. That means the next possible smoke would be around 5:30. This is just a guess, more or less, of the indications that we've received. At that point, it would come out only if the first ballot elected a new pope. And so we would see white smoke only come out around 5:30 or 6 or so. Later this evening, for sure there will be a black or a white smoke at around between 7:30. It all depends on when the Cardinals get started. And from there, we will continue on, and we hope the Cardinals are moving along in their voting process and guiding us toward the future of the church.
And again, very interesting phenomenon I think we saw last night. The square starts out almost not quite empty. There's always lots of people there, but it seems kind of sparse. And then people start filtering in. It fills up. But the moment, I think we all remember, the moment the white smoke comes out, everybody in Rome drops what they're doing. I remember John Paul II's, the conclave after John Paul II, and when Benedict was elected, people were actually leaving their cars by the side of the street and running to St. Peter's Square. We saw two of Pope Francis, which was later in the evening, and although it was not so dense when the white smoke came out, by the time he appeared on the balcony, all of St. Peter's Square, all the way up Via della Conciliazione, packed shoulder to shoulder with people. The whole world shows up.
Where we are right now, a sea of people coming, from
At the end of Via
Casa
Conciliazione.
Sant'Angelo, and just pouring into the Piazza Pia area, and then, as you said, down Conciliazione. There's no way you would have tried to go against the crowd. You would have been trampled, I think. But it was an astonishing thing.
And since this brings us to, we've seen the black smoke, we do not have a pope yet. Voting will continue this afternoon. And with that, we're going to wrap up this broadcast. We thank you, Kelsey, for helping us out in the square, Eduardo, Father Greg Uppersell, Joan Lewis, Dr. Don Prudlow. We really appreciate all of your help and walking us through the intricacies of this historic moment here in Vatican City State. And so our broadcast will pick up again this afternoon at around 5 or 5:30, depending on the indications. And many thanks go to our in-studio sound engineers and our producers. And we thank you for joining us as we await the Cardinals' decision about who will lead the Catholic Church as the next Pope. I'm Devin Watkins.
I'm Christopher Wells. Thank you all for joining us. Also, be sure to follow throughout the day our website, as well as our social media accounts, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, where you can find out lots more information about the conclave, about the process of electing a pope, and join us again this afternoon for the next Chimney Watch for the conclave of 2025.
Laudetur Jesus Christus, Praised be Jesus Christ.